Thank you for joining us. There's quite a few people in this room, but they're cypherpunks, so you won't see them. You are on the big screen, as you can see. Yeah, you can see. So yeah, I'm very excited to have this talk and on our day one, which is the day one is about governable spaces. And it was opened by Michelle Bowens, who talked about managing the planetary commons. So I think it's really cool to kind of counter, what's the word? Balance that with managing a very local space. And I think that actually Daniel's work in this field is probably the most interesting stuff that I've read so far. I met him at one of the MetaGov seminars. I think it was last year, and it was really interesting presentation of using Slackbot to manage a Coliving House. And as far as I understand, Daniel has developed that project, and he prepared a new presentation that I think would be a really interesting addition to today's program. So, Daniel, if you want to say a few words about yourself, and the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Artem. I'm so glad to be here. This is, sort of an opportunity that came up a couple of days ago, and I was very excited to be a part of it. Yeah, so a quick introduction about myself. So my name is Daniel. I have a degree in political economy and in computer science. And so a lot of my work has sort of been the intersection of sort of voting and governance and technology. I spent 6 years, and I still work at Colony, the DAO framework, developing their architecture and DAO tooling. And then a couple of years ago, I started Zaratan Co-Living, a co-living company, to bring some of these DAO ideas into the physical world. And one of the hypotheses that I had was that in a physical setting, a lot of the challenges you have in the digital setting, anonymity, civil attacks, low investment, kind of go away. And so you can actually do quite a lot in the physical space that you almost can't do purely online. So that was our hypothesis. And I would say by and large, it's been proven out. So that's kind of a little bit about me. And I'm going to present now a paper we wrote about the co-living house. All right. Can everyone see?
Yep. Yep.
Amazing. So I'm here to present a paper, Structures and Cultures, Computational Self-Regulation in a Non-Hierarchical Co-Living House. A little bit of a mouthful. What are you going to do? So this is the paper. It's on SSRN right now if you want to go to that link. It's also going to be published in the upcoming MetaGov journal, which I thought was very flattering that they included me. So it's online now. It'll be in the journal later. Please take a look. I think it's a pretty strong paper. So the first thing that I'll do is talk a bit about Sage House, which is the physical house where this all sort of is happening. So it's a 9-bedroom house in Los Angeles. It's a physical house. I own it. I spent 2 years during the pandemic renovating it. I did it with my dad. It was a real kind of father-son project. With luck and skill and a little bit of magic, crypto bull market, we managed to finish the project. We opened September 22. So far, we've had 20 people live in the house, so about one full set of turnover. People live an average of 10 months, and our occupancy rate is 98%, meaning that when people move out, someone else moves in pretty fast. There's very little management. So I'm technically the manager of the house. I'm the property manager. So when something breaks, I call the repair person. I'm the one who makes sure that the finances are all working. But I live in New York City, and I only spend 5 hours a month really doing this. Most of the day-to-day management of the house is done by the residents, and they do it using a set of tools called Chore wheel. And so kind of some of the themes of the paper and the themes of this talk are one, leadership. And the vision that we had for this co-living house where no one was the manager was a big goal of mine. And kind of that meant thinking about leadership differently. Instead of we have to pick one leader and put them in a position, instead it really became we treat leadership as kind of a field, almost like an energy field or a probability field. And we need to be able to access as much of that leadership as we can wherever it might come up. And so when someone, it's not as if one person is a leader, everyone is a leader sometimes. And so how do we make it so that when someone wants to step up or feel some initiative or wants to solve a problem, they have the tools to do so? And related to that, we took a lot of influence from cybernetics, which I know is, whenever I hear that word, I think of like the Terminator, but really it means feedback systems and computational aids. So thinking about how to use a computer to help with process, how do you use a computer to help with memory? And so these were some of our themes for the project and the paper. So, I wrote this paper initially for a economics conference that was devoted to the work of Elinor Ostrom, who was an economist who did a lot of work on governing the commons. She studied many groups in the wild who have been effectively managing resources like fisheries, forests, water systems, and she found that all these different groups had a lot of the same patterns in their institutional designs. And so, one of my collaborators, Seth Frey, was a student of Eleanor's, and we really worked to design Chore Wheel kind of along these lines. It was kind of interesting because she looked at real world case studies and came up with these principles. We took these principles and turned them into a real world example. So it's sort of funny the way that the causality was reversed, right? She fed the real world into a model. We took the model and generated a real world example from it. Where I think it's going to get interesting for this audience is we took it a little bit further and added 4 new principles, which we thought were appropriate for the digital setting. We came up with this term, distributed digital institutions, which, it's funny, it wasn't until I finished the paper that I realized that I hadn't mentioned DAOs at all. And that was a little bit on purpose, in that I've tried to downplay the Web3 influence in this project to my audience, because I just don't want to be tagged as like a tech bro. I really want the focus to be on the economics, on the shared leadership. And so I kind of minimize the DAO influence, even though clearly, if you look at the work, it's really there. And so the idea here was, how do we, to create a really flat system that uses computers in a lot more of a sophisticated way, we added these 4 principles. One of them, as I said before, no managers or privileged roles. Anyone in the house can perform any action if they want to. The second one, simple and intuitive inputs. And the idea there is that, we talk a lot about voter fatigue or people being uninformed. If you're going to give people these multiple pages of text and expect them to do a pass or fail, people are going to really struggle. So what we said was, what if instead we said, we're going to make the decision as simple as possible? Did this person clean the dishes? Should we buy more rice? Do we think that it's more important to clean the front yard or the backyard, right? Making every decision as simple of an atomic unit as possible, and then put most of the computation in like the analysis, would mean that participants without deep governance experience could come in and, just on the virtue of their own sensing and judgment, provide meaningful inputs. The third one, humans for sensing, machines for bookkeeping, going back to the cybernetics. I have a data science and machine learning background, and I actually came away a little bit cynical, because I just saw how much noisy data was being used to train biased models. And I kind of thought, this is no good. And so, making most of the subjective decisions, the reasoning done by humans, and then the machines really do just the bookkeeping in the process. And having that be a clear line really goes a long way to keeping the system legitimate. I didn't want people to feel like, oh, the algorithm that we don't understand and we don't trust is controlling our lives. I really wanted people to feel as though these tools are really serving us. We're not serving them. And then the fourth thing was this idea of continuously available asynchronous processes, which I think for this audience is maybe a no-brainer. But for co-living people who are used to really long meetings, and the idea was every week we have a meeting for 3 or 4 hours to talk about all the issues, I wanted to say, no, we can do everything on Slack. Voting is a 3-day window. You don't need to ever really get all in the same place at any given time, which the hope was it would make it possible for people to participate more. And I drew a lot of influence from Discord gaming communities, actually, who have already really been using these Slack bots to do a lot of their internal operations for months and years. And I just thought it was very impressive. And so the last thing I'll say is in the DAO context, we can think of this as a design pattern because all of this is really a subset of what we might think of as, DAOs writ large. So this is a slide I added. This isn't in the paper, but I think this audience is going to appreciate it. So if you've ever taken a machine learning course or an information theory course, I highly recommend it. It's really an amazing field. But there's this one result that really influenced me. It's called the data processing inequality. And basically, if you have these three variables, A, B, and C, such that A causes B and B causes C, and I think we're going to think of them as being A is the world, which is the thing that we want to know about. B is the data, which are the observations that we have. That can be a sensor inputs, that can be votes, it could be text. And then the analysis is kind of the end product that we use to make a decision. Do we pass or fail? Do we put $10 here, $10 there? The result down here, this I means mutual information. What it says is that the mutual information between the world and your analysis can never be more than the mutual information of the world and your data, right? So whatever is not in the data is never going to appear in the analysis. And kind of the takeaway is, instead of doing more and more fancy analysis on low quality or noisy data, focus instead on getting the highest quality data that you can. And then it actually becomes much easier to do analysis because the signal is so much stronger at the source. And I think when we talk about legitimacy, there's a lot to be said where if the data is high quality, then the results are going to be seen as more legitimate and trusted. If the data is noisy, then the results are going to be seen as less legitimate. And so when we're dealing with these technical governance systems, this idea of legitimacy and high quality data, I think, are pretty tightly coupled. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the actual app and some of the data. So these are examples of the Chore wheel interface. It's all done via Slack bots, as I mentioned a moment ago. I took a lot of influence from kind of Discord gaming communities. And so we kind of see, with the Chores app, people are claiming chores. I'm not going to talk so much about the actual mechanisms in this talk. If you want to get more into that, you can read the paper or even some earlier things that we've written, which lay out the mechanisms in much more detail. You can see people in the Slack are doing chores, getting points. We have like a peer verification process. Hearts we have, it's kind of our reputation system. You can see the people in the house. They have different amounts of hearts representing people doing better or worse, being more engaged, less engaged. And the things one, this is a pretty simple app. It's really just buying things from a whitelist. But I add this because I want to show how through the kind of 4 design principles that I suggested earlier, you can actually use to generate many, many different mechanisms, not just one, right? So all of these different mechanisms sort of exist within these constraints. And that means that we can take a problem and solve it pretty easily by just working within these design constraints, which I thought was kind of cool. Early on, I had like maybe 5 or 6 more mechanisms I really was excited about that ultimately I just never made. But we just thought about this one and that one. And what if we did a mechanism for art? What if we did a mechanism for doing parties? And there were just so many things we could do when you have a pretty tight design framework to work with. And so now I'm going to talk about data from the app. Again, having a data science background, I really wanted there to be interesting data coming out of Chore Wheel. I think the idea of instrumenting a physical house, not physically, but socially, was really interesting to me. And I really wanted to make it possible to do really rich analyses off of Chore Wheel data. So here we see data from the Chores app. And, the core of the Chores app is a budgeting system that actually the Colony team developed many years ago called Budget Box, which uses sort of pairwise inputs to develop a budget over a set of items. And we actually use that as part of Chore Wheel to basically prioritize the chores. And the idea is chores that are more important should be worth more points, and chores that are less important should be worth less points. And we see here that system actually works pretty well, and that the chores that we think are the most important end up being worth the most, right? So dishes is the most important, worth the most. And we see how the kind of, what I call the wet chores, the kitchen, the bathroom tend to be the more important chores, and then the kind of the quote unquote dry chores, which are like the sweeping, tend to be worth a little bit less, which I think corresponds to our intuitions that people want more time spent cleaning the kitchen, dishes, and bathrooms. And then over here on chart B, we see basically, how does the overall value of a chore and how many points it's worth when you do the chore kind of correlate? And the answer is mostly it's a strong positive correlation. The more a chore is worth, kind of the higher priority it is, the more it's worth when someone does it. But there's one chore and it's dishes, and it breaks the mold, which is even though dishes are worth the most overall, people actually do them more often for less points, right? So instead of doing the dishes once every week for 100 points, people do them every day for 10 points. And I just think it's kind of funny because people talk a lot about dishes, 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 but we can really empirically show that dishes are actually ontologically a bit of a unique task, which is like kind of silly, but I think it's interesting that that is a result. I think there maybe is more to unpack there, but that's for another day. Something else that I was really happy about was, I talk about there being no manager in the house and people really self-organizing. And so I thought, okay, people self-organize to do chores. What kind of behaviors what kind of patterns are we going to see emerge? And specifically, I thought, are people going to specialize? Are we going to say, I'm going to do the dishes, I'm going to clean the bathroom. Someone else is going to say, I'm going to, mostly do the downstairs sweeping. Are we going to settle into a routine where people kind of have their area? Or is it going to be constant kind of chaos where everyone's always fighting over doing different tasks? And it turns out that there seems to be at least some amount of this sort of organic self-specialization, where we see, kind of the user on the left-hand side is doing mostly the downstairs tidying tasks, and the user on the right is doing a lot more of the kitchen tasks. And this chart was honestly somewhat cherry picked. I looked at different users in different periods of time, and this one was one where it was very clear that there was specialization. Sometimes it's a little bit less clear, but I did want to show that this does occur at least some of the time. And ultimately, this paper is based on field data. We didn't run an experiment, so it's really just observational data for this paper. My hope is in the future we can do something a bit more experimental, but I want to show that this kind of analysis is possible using the signals generated by Chore Wheel as a platform. This is some data from the reputation system Hearts. I don't have a ton to say about it just yet. It's a bit noisy. You can tell that we changed the mechanism about halfway through the year to add some more decay. So I don't really have any strong conclusions from this, except that we do generally see returns to baseline, right? There's clearly a desire to sort of maintain equilibrium, which tells me that the system is working to some extent, although I think there's a lot of nuance here that I don't have the data to unpack just yet. And this is a chart based on the Things app. The thing that I want to talk about here is, I said earlier that if you have these sort of simple inputs, low barriers to participation, you'll get more engagement and therefore more legitimacy. That was the hypothesis. The chart on the right, chart B, it's basically, it's basically kind of a power law of engagements. And typically with engagement, you expect to see kind of an 80-20 type of distribution where 20% of the users do 80% of the engagement. In this case, we see actually a much fatter tail where 40% of the users are doing 80% of the engagement. So instead of 20%, which you'd expect, we have 40% of users doing the engagement, which to me indicates that there's a much higher level of engagement overall. And again, this is field data, so I can only speculate. It's because the interface is easy to use, intuitive, and engaging. So through these engaging design principles, we just see much higher engagement than you would typically expect to see just at baseline, which I thought was kind of a neat result. But as I said earlier, these are field data, so we can't really conclude anything causally just yet. So that was the paper. Some discussion questions that we ask are, can we reject the null hypothesis that the apps do nothing? People have said, Daniel, maybe you just really have great people in the house and the apps are actually totally irrelevant. And if the apps didn't exist, things would go just as well. I think that is a little bit unrealistic for a couple of reasons. I think that 20 people with really no experience living communally, all basically thriving at random in the presence of an irrelevant app, I think I can't really buy that. But we can't disprove it either. The second thing, are these interfaces working? As I said, I got a lot of influence from the Discord gaming community. I designed these, so I did my best. I got feedback from early users. I'm kind of working within the constraints of the Slack ecosystem. Things are working pretty well, but could they be working better? Are there interfaces that could be even more engaging, more effective, more clear? And would people engage more if they were? That's a question that I would love to be able to answer, but it's going to be a longer project. And I think will probably involve some more collaborators because, at a certain point, you can only do so much on your own, just even perspective wise. Like I only understand what I understand. And the third one, and my collaborator Seth Frey talks about this a lot. It's funny, we almost have totally opposite philosophies at this point about governance, which makes it really funny to work with him. But he's very anti-technology. I don't. Well, I shouldn't say that. He wouldn't like that. But he really believes in the value of the in-person meeting, and he says there's inherent value in people getting together and talking things through. And if you over automate and have too much technology mediating your interactions, you're actually going to lose your skills and abilities. And there's this line: "Is freedom an endless meeting?" And I think the question I'll leave you is the pursuit of digital governance self-limiting? As digital governance gets better and better, are people going to start losing the skills that they need to make good decisions? And so is there a value in actually being a bit more low tech sometimes? So those are the questions. That was the talk, and that was basically the paper. So the last kind of plug I'll make is, so Chore is now live in 3 houses. It's going pretty well, but I would really like to start to get that number up. I think getting this into 10 houses and even more is going to really help us develop the project further, give us more perspective and more input. So if you want to use Chore, if you live in a communal living house or someone who does and they're fighting over dishes or just could really improve their overall level of peace and harmony, scan the QR code, fill out the interest form, and I'll be in touch. And if you just want to talk to me in general, that's my email. I would love to discuss basically anything with anyone. So, I've been working on this project by myself for years, and I would really love some feedback. So yeah, that's my talk, and I'm not sure how we're doing on time, Artem, but happy to hang out, answer questions, or do whatever.
Thank you. Everyone is clapping. Everyone is very excited.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes left for this session. So yeah, it would be great to have some questions from the audience.
I have a very simple question. Do you have a dishwasher?
Do you have a dishwasher?
We do have a dishwasher. It's actually a great question, because one nice thing about the chore wheel system is that the chores the definitions of the chores themselves are a factor. Like, finding the quote unquote right chore definition is actually pretty contextually specific. So, if you have a dishwasher, you can adjust the dishes chore to include that, right? So what the dishes chore looks like specifically is basically, if there's anything in the sink, it has to get out of the sink, right? Either that means loading the dishwasher, or if it doesn't fit, doing it by hand. If anything is dry in the dish rack, you put it back. If the dishwasher is full, you run the dishwasher, right? So the presence of the dishwasher doesn't mean that you can't do a dishes chore. It just changes what that chore looks like, right? Think of it, we talk about this in the paper, right? Ultimately the goal is to take the kind of entropy ball from the bottom of the hill and put it back to the top of the hill, right? So what does the top of the hill look like for dishes? It looks like the sink being empty, dry, clean dishes being back where they belong, and the dishwasher either running or not being full yet, right? So as long as you return to that state, then the task was done. And then over time, that task will, that ball will roll down the hill and you'll have to take it to the top of the hill. So really what the chore means is going to be contextual, and the presence of a dishwasher does not mean that there is no dishes chore. It just changes what that chore looks like.
That's the answer.
Thank you.
I have another question. What are the points? Is like just gamification, or is there any economic incentive around points?
That's a great question. We talked about that a lot early on. The joke I have with my collaborators, Seth and Joe, is that I came into the project with a lot of ideas. I think most of the mechanistic ideas I had already developed when we started working together. And a lot of their contribution was just telling me which of them were the worst or the most bad. And that was definitely one of them. I had been excited early on about, well, if people get more points, then they'll get a rent credit. And it's like a whole system. We ended up dropping that for a couple of reasons. One, when you're dealing with physical housing, there actually are quite a lot of laws you have to comply with. And it turns out that having variable rent is a little bit illegal. it's not illegal, but it just is very hard to make legal. And I just decided that it wasn't worth pursuing. And the second reason was that I was worried it would bring a lot of class dynamics into the house, and having points be more of a community currency actually, I think, was more effective in giving people a sense of kind of collaboration versus financializing the points. But yeah, there are also a couple of things. They're very ephemeral, right? So I'm actually generally quite biased against community currencies. So the fact that this community currency ends up working really well is, I was surprised. But I think a couple things that make it work are, as I said, it's not financialized and it's ephemeral, right? So points don't accumulate forever. At the end of every month, they go away. So they're really a community currency that's very time bound. At the beginning of the month, everyone resets to 0. And then at the end of the month, you get up to 100. And then on the first of the month, you go back down to 0 and what you have goes away. And so there's really no long running memory. You can gift points in the context of the month, where if someone does something nice, you can gift them some of your points that you've earned. So there is a little bit of an exchange there, but they don't do anything except function as a counter for your commitment, or for your obligation.
Is there any kind of facilitation of not just chores, but some kind of communal projects inside the co-living? For instance, like, I don't know, maybe some movie nights, or I don't know, like bake-offs, or some, like elections, something like that, because it feels like there is space for that, and the system would benefit from that.
Well, the system could be used to organize projects like movie nights and bake-offs.
It's a really good question. It's something that I've been thinking about and kind of working through. I think that well, how do I answer that? My initial coming out of the gate, I tried to really, it's gonna be funny when I say this because of how highly systematized this house is. I actually wanted to under systematize it, and the idea was, if I start the house with many systems, it's going to be very hard to tell which ones are working well and which ones are not, because there's going to be so many interactions. So I start with only the bare minimum, and then I see how things go. And I also thought, going back to the last point about is freedom an endless meeting, I kind of wanted to leave a lot of space under systematized to see what people would do, right? Because I think that there's this phenomenon, which is, once you financialize or systematize something, there's less room for personal relationships and culture to kind of develop. And so I really thought, okay, let's see if people organize movie nights on their own. Do I need to develop a system for organizing a movie night, or is that something that people will just do spontaneously? And I thought, if I come in with some kind of system, is that going to prevent them from developing their own sort of capacity? That was the idea I had at the beginning. I think at this point, it's clear that there might be some benefit to having some structure to doing other events. But I think with chores, I had a lot of clarity on what that system needed to do. With this one, I have a little bit less clarity. There is a karma system where you can give people basically like generic karma for doing something that's just nice and thoughtful. But that one's not getting a lot of engagement. It got engagement last year with the first cohort, but the new cohort doesn't seem to be using it. So I'm not quite sure. Someone said, can we give points out for one-off projects? And I was sort of resistant to that. So I think that is like a current ongoing design question, where I think there's some opportunity to systematize and support one-off projects. But I also don't want to suppress spontaneity by coming in with a bad design. So I don't know the answer yet. It's an important question. It's something I'm thinking about a lot, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you. Flynn?
Are any of the houses spontaneously creating their own economies around the token? So, for example, if they already have a movie night, whoever has the most points gets to choose the movie, or like someone internally created use of the point system, or are people generally will just accept the points?
It's a great question. I had a lot of hopes for that sort of thing emerging. I think that so far I haven't seen a lot of that. And I think my hypothesis is that, it's just not like I think I explicitly wanted a non-technical user base. Like it was very important to me that this not be seen as something for techies, because people told me, Daniel, this is a tech house, just have tech people live there, everything will be great. And I said, no, I think it's really important to me to show that these kinds of systems can be used, quote unquote, for everybody. This is not a niche thing. This is actually a very general thing. That was very important to me. And I think by and large that has been the case. But I'm not getting a lot of that kind of creative reuse that I would have hoped. And then I think that's just because the audience themselves are not particularly technically minded. And so I think they're not thinking about these kinds of creative reuses of the tools. I just don't think that that's where they're at. I see a little bit of it sometimes, but I think I would see more of that if the house was more into like self-consciously technological. But this group, I just don't think they're thinking that way.
By the way, are you still using Slackbot?
Yeah, we're still using Slackbots. I mean, I do think that moving to Discord, not moving to, but developing a parallel implementation is a good idea. But again, like as I'm the only engineer on this project, so I do have to prioritize. But I think that would be if some more of that Gitcoin grant money comes in, I can maybe start the Discord bot.
Is there any way that like low scoring or negative perception expressed on the system anyway by other housemates can get you vote banned, like out of here, like we don't want you here. You're a bad contributor to this space. We think this person should leave. I saw in some of the graphs of the hearts that you had that someone at some point was below the average of 5, which means that they got the dislike of the people that are co-living expressed more than once. They went like down to 3. Does that get to any point? There's any clause that says like, oh, you're at 0, you're out of here, or is that none to do?
No, I mean, it's a great question. Yes. So something that I thought a lot about early on, and I spent a lot of money on lawyers to figure this out, is how do you kick someone out? Because the houses in California, California has very strong rent control and tenant protection laws, as they should. I mean, I think that generally these are good laws, but it does mean that once someone is living in a house, getting them to leave is actually very hard. And I've heard so many horror stories of other co-living companies where you have one person who just ends up being totally nuts, and you can't get them to leave, and everyone else moves out. I remember there was this one co-living company over the pandemic had this one house. I think it was an 8 or 9 person house, and there was just one woman living there because no one else wanted to move in, and they couldn't get her out, and it was just a total disaster. And so that was kind of like my nightmare. And so I thought a lot about how can we actually get someone to leave. And I talked with my lawyers about it. We developed a whole theory, but basically the way it works is you have hearts, and hearts, you can lose hearts by not doing chores. You can lose hearts if someone explicitly says, hey, I think that you did a bad thing. It was very disrespectful. I think we should take away a heart. If you read the documentation, this is all laid out in detail. But basically, people can lose hearts. They also gain hearts over time, which I was really proud of. Every month, you regain half of a heart. And so the idea that forgiveness is really baked in was very important to me as like in terms of like a goal I had for a reputation system, was to make forgiveness really like first class. But there's no cost to losing hearts until you run out of hearts. If you have 0 hearts, then you get a fine. And that fine starts small, but gets bigger and bigger. And basically you either have to pay the fine or move out. And so that was the system, going back to the kind of Eleanor Ostrom design, like economic system design. A big idea of hers is the importance of graduated sanctions, where if it's just everything's fine and out of nowhere, a huge penalty, it's seen as illegitimate by the participants. Going back to legitimacy, but if you have very clear processes for penalties, then people take them more seriously because they feel fair, right? So the idea that hearts are just symbolic, you're just, this behavior is bad, but there's no consequence, just change your behavior. And then, okay, now you're getting a fine, but it's a small fine. If it happens again, a big fine. If it happens again, a big fine. That kind of slow system will come off. Well, I mean, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but I suspect is going to be a lot more legitimate by all the people involved. versus them saying, hey, this isn't fair. What are you doing? I'm just not going to do this. Right. Like I do worry about those things. So that's the system as we have it. So far, we've never had to test it out. As I said, no one's gotten below 3 hearts yet. Is that because they're afraid or because the system is working well? Like I can't tell you if the system is working well because no one's running out of hearts or it's not working at all. I don't know the answer to that yet.
Do the hearts also decay automatically towards 5, or they just regrow
Yes.
automatically?
Both. So you can earn bonus hearts, and those decay back to 5, which is something that I actually only added a few months ago because everyone was maxing out at 7, and I thought this is not interesting anymore, right? If everyone just maxes out, like there has to be a flow here. So yeah, so they decay, they regenerate. 5 is the baseline.
Thank you. One more question from Joram.
Part of the company is renting a space in a co-working kind of NGO, I guess you could call it, like a non-profit co-working space. And they have.
Daniel, do you hear the question?
It's a little bit faint, but I can hear it mostly. If you need to repeat it, I'll ask.
It's using my laptop's microphone, unfortunately, so I won't be able to repeat your question. So please come here.
Hey, Daniel. You get to see one other person, I guess.
With the cypherpunk.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, my company is renting space in a co-working NGO. They have something like 45 members, and they self-organize basically all the processes. So we have a kitchen, we organize lunch, we have all these different systems in place. But I think it would be really interesting to use something like this because some of the chores are very kind of they don't have to happen very often, basically. So the dishes tend to self-organize, and people cooking lunch tend to self-organize, but taking out the trash, for example, or paper recycling can build up. And I was wondering if you had considered adapting this tool not only for co-living, but also basically space maintenance in general, rather than just housing.
I have thought about it, and I think that honestly, there's really nothing stopping someone from taking this and using it in that use case. I think a lot of the skin of the app is co-living specific, but the underlying mechanisms I think are really not. So if you wanted to apply this to a co-working space, I think that would be pretty possible, basically just as is. So if you wanted to email me or fill out the interest form, I'd be happy to talk through what that could look like. Yeah, I think you could really do it probably tomorrow if you wanted to.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, I want to make sure, is the QR code still up there? Does anyone need to see it again?
Yes, I don't think we have any other questions. Thank you so much for joining us. Really good talk and good luck.
Thank you so much.